Welcome to the TC Dojo from Single Sourcing Solutions. The TC Dojo is a TechCom community that is driven by you. Tell us what you want to learn. You choose the topics, and we find the experts. In the TC Dojo open session today, we have Kelly Schrank. She is an experienced writer and editor of medical, technical, and marketing communication. She has created and improved an extreme variety of documentation types. She's managed departments and teams and solves problems while sharing information. She's currently the president of STC Rochester chapter and became an STC Associate Fellow last year. It's been my great fortune to get to know Kelly over the last few years, and we are grateful she agreed to be our TC Dojo visiting master today. Now, she has a lot to cover, so please save your questions until the end. However, be sure to type them in when you think of them so you don't forget what you wanted to ask.
Great, thanks a lot, Liz. Today my goal is to turn all of you into checklist specialists, evangelists for the benefits of an old school hack, a paper checklist, and our computer-centric daily work lives. My comprehensive checklists, when used to their full potential, have the power to make you more consistent and productive in your communication tasks. I've been an advocate for the use of comprehensive checklists and communication tasks for 7 or 8 years. You could say I'm passionate about the topic. I get a little excited when I start talking about how much checklists can help writers and editors be more productive and consistent in their work. So let's get started by looking at what we're going to cover today. I'll provide an introduction to the topic of using comprehensive checklists in work situations and how I use them in my own work. I'll walk you through how to create a good comprehensive checklist, according to me, for the expert here today, I guess, for the way I use them to be more productive and consistent in my communications tasks. I'll answer the question, how do you know when you have good checklists? I'll provide some highlights of what we've talked about. Then I welcome questions about how you can become a checklist specialist. Or I'd love to hear your testimonials about the joys and life-changing properties of checklists for those who already consider themselves checklist specialists. I'll finish by showing the resources and my contact information if you want more information or want to stay in touch. And then I think Liz has some time at the end where you can ask questions. So just to offer this disclaimer, I do know that lots of people like checklists. People do have to-do lists for daily tasks. They have packing lists for travel. They use grocery lists. But Atul Gawande, a well-known staff writer for The New Yorker and author of 4 bestsellers, wrote a whole book on how checklists are used by people in a variety of industries to save lives, fly planes, and manage large-scale construction projects. It covers checklists as people use them in the workplace, which is what I'll be talking about. And lucky you, my discussion will be specific to tasks that you're likely to do as technical communicators. I highly recommend this book. It's a fun read, very engaging, with a running story about the use of checklists to save lives in operating rooms, and with many interesting ventures into research about how other industries use checklists. One thing I want to mention up front from the book, Gawande talks about how people think using a checklist is beneath them. They're too smart for that. They don't need it. So let me offer you this. Maybe you don't need a checklist on your good days at work. When you've got enough sleep, you have no worries occupying your mind, you have no interruptions, and you're in a great mood. But what about those days when one of those things, or all of those things, are off? The checklist is there for you to make you your better self every day. Because I've presented this topic in different formats, I want to make sure I tie the reasons for using checklists directly to the point of the talk. How do they make you more consistent? How do checklists make you more productive? So I've got some reasons here. Going through the process of establishing what needs to be done, organizing my steps within the task for optimal efficiency, and being able to follow a set list of items that I check off as I go has allowed me to be more productive and more consistent in my editing, writing, and communications tasks. As an editor especially, this ability to be consistent has been invaluable, but I think it's helpful for many other types of tasks as well. The checklist keeps me on task, allows me to stop and start back up with less loss of focus, and certainly less worry that I'm going to miss something. And it allows me to track metrics and accurately estimate future projects. It's a nice motivational tool as well. You get to see your progress as you go, and if you have good metrics, you'll be able to better estimate how much longer the task will take. Because I have a lot to do in too little time, like many of you, and because I do value quality and consistency in the materials I edit and write, like many of you, I like knowing I've done my best, and the checklist documents all of that. So how do you get started in creating a comprehensive checklist? Here's a roadmap of what we'll cover. The bulk of this session is going to be about how you create a comprehensive checklist for use with communication tasks at work. Though it may seem like a lot of steps, some of them are simple. You can see that right away. And the hard ones? Well, during the hard work in these steps, it's usually where you get the most benefit from the checklist. For the right task, the benefits are more than worth the work. And I'll show you samples from my own checklist throughout to help the visual learners. So let's get started. First step, of course, is to choose a task. Hopefully the discussion has got you thinking about tasks that need a good comprehensive checklist, or maybe when you go back to work, you might think of other options. And I'll be providing some food for thought on tasks that might benefit from a comprehensive checklist on the next slide. So what types of tasks need checklists? In my experience, tasks that are similar and repeated regularly are good candidates for a comprehensive checklist. But then there's also some tasks that you don't do often that are sometimes good for checklists as well. So it kind of depends. But for an example, as a medical editor, I would edit a number of standard responses, probably 5 to 10 every day. They were all similar in style and format, and even the content would be similar in those in the same therapeutic area. So it could be really hard to remember what I had done in a particular document by the end of the day. Did I check the abbreviations in this one? Or was I doing that in the last one? I also had to access the documents in 4 different systems over the 8 years that I worked there. And there would always be updates or changes to the process or the systems. We would often be asked to start checking for new things or sometimes stop checking for certain things. Documenting the steps in the checklist helped me remember the latest process and requirements and perform the steps more efficiently without second guessing myself. The checklist also documented current style and formatting details, so I could be sure that I was up to date with the latest style guide, something else that was always changing and evolving. Checking items off the checklist as I went along allowed me to start and stop an editing task without forgetting where I was and losing time duplicating my efforts. And with all the different types of projects we all have, tracking metrics for your tasks, whether you do it for yourself or because you have to, is much easier if you do it on your checklists. So here's one of those easy steps. Grab a blank piece of paper. Now, some people are going to default to opening a Word document, but I find that if the task is also on the computer, which is pretty much a given with us, I find it easier to write it down with pen and paper. I also find that if you're creating the checklist on the computer as you do the task, you tend to get distracted and work on the checklist format or edit it while you're putting there, and that's not the point here, as I'll show you in the next step. So start to perform the task. As you're performing the task, write down everything you do. Just get it down rough, like you're brainstorming, without editing yourself. Just get it all down on paper. So some advice with this: don't do this in a rush. If you have a panic job, don't do it with this one. Don't assume that anything. What would happen if you left your job and came back? What would prompt you to remember what needs to be done? Write it down at that level. Be patient. Give yourself time to write everything down. And you can edit it later, but I know I've just said this again, but just write it all down. Just get it all down on paper. And write down every step. Writing down all of the steps is where you get the productivity benefits of the checklist. Has anyone ever got interrupted in the middle of a task? Oh, me neither. But if you did, and you had it marked on the checklist where you stopped, then you would know where to start back up again without having to think about, oh, where was I? Did I do this stuff yet? Have you ever forgotten something because you thought you had done it? Have you ever started doing something to a document, like checking the headings or finding an abbreviation that's often spelled wrong? then realize, wait, I did this already. Again, this is where the checklist helps. Are there items that you're afraid you'll forget or that you have forgotten when you're doing a task in the past? Write it down. The checklist is there for you. But keep in mind, this is not a one and done. That's why there's many more steps after this one. Sure, you can brainstorm what needs to be done at a particular task, but don't call that a checklist. So number 5, type everything into the file now. So now that you have it all written down, type it all into a document. I use Word. You can use whatever makes sense to you based on what you have available. At this point, I wouldn't edit it. Just put it all in. You can take stuff out when you test it. But when you do create a format for it, don't forget a space for check marks, because if you're going to do this on paper like I do, you're definitely going to want to have a place to check. And on the next 3 sides, you'll see some excerpts from a couple of my checklists. Now don't judge. These are for your use only. You can put together something that's more attractive, but these are things that have worked for me for many years. The next step is to add specifics. So I'm just going to go on a little rant here about to forget what you've seen in writing or editing textbooks that are helping newbies learn what technical writing or editing is. You're a professional. You need better tools. I've seen checklists in textbooks or on websites that are really generic, and they'll say something like, check the headings. When you're editing multiple clients for specific types of documents with different styles under a tight deadline, this isn't helpful. Notate and show what the headings should look like so you know at a glance how they should look. Otherwise, you'll get confused about what client needs, which header or which abbreviation they use. I'm telling you this from experience. So show what you want to see, say what it should be specifically, like I'm showing here. So here's a snippet from a checklist that showed how tables should look in a certain type of document. Since one of the goals of the editors was to be consistent, was to make documents consistent across the therapeutic areas and across the different writers, the editors needed to make sure the documents look similar. This is an attempt to help the writers see when a table had the right formatting and coloring. All of this is spelled out in more detail and in more words and more description in the style guide. But this is meant to be a cheat sheet to help the editors quickly see what's right. Because often what we found was if it looked right, it probably was right. And if it looked wrong, it was really wrong. So usually you could look quickly at the checklist and know what you were dealing with. As I've mentioned for any type of checklist, don't just assume that you'll remember all the steps in the process of the task or the exact style items. Write it all down. So I've struggled in the past with social media tasks. I have an example here of how to post a Twitter. But if you think about the larger process of publicizing an event, something I only do once a month for the chapter, and usually at the last minute when I've already worked my full-time job during the day, well, I need help remembering what needs to be done. And it's not just what needs to be done, though it can be hard to remember all of the steps. It's what order to. So for example, some things have to be done in a specific order. Like you can't finish creating the event in Eventbrite if you don't have an image, and you can't include a link to the event if it's not created in Eventbrite. For other things, it helps if you do it in a specific order, like writing the LinkedIn post, which can be longer, than stealing text from it to post to Twitter, which has shorter character limits. And speaking of character limits, how do you keep track of the character limits? How do you keep track of the image requirements for all the different platforms? You can put all of that on a checklist so you don't forget. So this is where you reap many of the productivity benefits of a checklist, thinking about how you can be more efficient in performing the task. This part takes a bit of time, but once you have it all typed into the checklist, it's easier to move things around. If you're editing documents, for instance, you want to group activities that require you to use the find function in one section. You may still rearrange things in the testing or revising steps, but do your best based on what your instincts tell you at the time. You've probably been doing this for a while. Your instincts are probably pretty good. You may find ways to be more efficient later on when you're thinking about things differently because now you have this cool checklist to work with. But just kind of go with your first spark of instinct at this point. So here's a snippet from a checklist that shows how I moved through the document by first cleaning up spacing and formatting issues, since those aren't usually tracked, and it gives me a nice clean document to work with no distractions. The first couple of steps are big picture items that allow me to get a view of the whole document before I get down to the details in the body text. Short timelines, most editors no longer have the luxury of multiple passes with documents, so this sort of mini pass gives them a snapshot of the document before they dive into it. But think about what makes sense for what needs to be done for what you're doing. So this is where you put the specifics of the processes, what you might have to do in a particular system. This is especially important if your systems or processes just changed, or if they're not intuitive, or they're so confusing you have to keep looking at instructions. In these cases, you want to put the instructions in the checklist. If it's something you just know how to do, then you can just write perform spell check or update table of contents. But the checklist is there for you if you need more details. So here's a snippet from a checklist showing the last few steps of editing a particular type of document. These steps are mechanics that need to be done to complete a task in the systems I worked on. Obviously, we all need to run a spell check, but then it covers things like making sure the cross-references are updated, which is something that's easy to miss if you don't do it a lot. Checking over the document one last time, which is a nice reminder. Like if it's in track changes, you want to check both with and without markup to make sure that it's going to be easy, for the writers to update later. You want to make sure you save it, for goodness sake. People say, that seems silly, doesn't it? But yeah, every so often you'll have a document like, oh my gosh, I didn't save that, and you get in some panic. And then some of the tasks we needed to do once we put the document in the system. At the end, there's also this feel-good section that I called Great Catch, where I used to document when I caught something important. So like a misspelled product name, the wrong data in a table, different abbreviations for one term or the same abbreviations for different terms. This is just kind of a nice to have. It's not necessary, but sometimes, I would look over the checklist over a week and be like, okay, I feel like I did something this week. Not just editing all that, but yeah, I made some good catches. This section can be anything you need it to be. And some people do this and some people don't, but does your boss want to know how much time you spend on a particular task? Do you need to prove that something that seems easy to people who don't do this all day is actually more complicated and time-consuming than it looks? For editing tasks, are there certain authors or teams or topics that take up more time, either because the work comes to you in a worse state or because it's just more complicated? These types of things can be tracked in checklists and summarized into reports or informal discussions with others. And I know in the past I've done that in jobs where it comes up that certain people are kind of problematic. They're not as good of writers as other people. Their work takes longer. Or, a topic like oncology has a lot of unusual terminology, and that's always harder. And so it's just kind of nice to have that documented somewhere. Paper checklists are also a useful tool for remembering what was going on with a particular task if asked about it later. For example, if you didn't have time to check everything or do everything in your checklist, you'll have a note of it, and your tracking information may show why. For instance, was it a rush? Was it a long document? Troublesome author? Did you not have enough time to work on it? Is usually the deadline was too tight for the type of document, for the length of the document. You can also use the sheet to track little details specific to a task in case there are things that cropped up that were not on the checklist. So I find this sometimes with new therapeutic areas or products for the pharmaceutical editing I do. I have some common terms in the checklist and many more in the style guide. But with a new product or indication for a product, there may be a word I've never seen before. And if I go to the trouble of looking it up in a reference to find out what's the proper way to use the word or spell the word or capitalize the word, and then I run across it again, I can go back to my last checklist for that product or indication and find out what I did last time. If I think I'll see it a lot more, then I'll go and put it on the style guide later or into some other, helpful document we have, but sometimes it's a one-off and I'll never see it again. So just make a note on the checklist. I don't put a lot of effort into it, but if I do need it later, it'll be there. Here are a couple of snippets showing tracking items and a couple of different types of checklists I use. You can see that you can be very specific and spell out whatever details are helpful to you. If you support a whole team of writers, for instance, and you need to tell your boss who's been sending you work and who has not, then a quick flip through the checklist will show you that certain writers or certain teams are sending you work. It can also tell you if they're not sending you work, which is one of the ways I ended up using this, with certain teams who were not sending work and they were supposed to be. And later you can consolidate all of this. I used to do it monthly to get a better idea of what you're working on or not working on that you should be, depending on how things are going at work. So here's some of the easier parts, sort of, the quick steps at the end here, in case you were wondering how I was going to get through all these. So I try to be green in most areas of my life, but when it comes to checklists, as I mentioned, I prefer paper. One reason is because I prefer the physical act of checking something off a paper checklist. Some people, especially if they have multiple monitors, might be more comfortable with an electronic checklist, but I find it easier to write small notes on paper, and it also gives your eyes a momentary break from staring at the screen. I do print double-sided on copy paper with a draft option on my printer. I try to keep them to fewer sheets of paper when possible, but I do use a lot of paper for checklists. So at this point in the steps, you want to get it all down on paper, rearrange it until it makes sense, then test it with a real task. And then you want to edit it as you go. When you're done with the task, update the checklist, print it out, and test it again. You're not stuck with your original sequence of steps. Try something new if some of the steps don't seem to be flowing. Test it, update it, then test it again. Obviously, at step 10, you don't want to print out a bunch of these. Just print one, use it, fix it, and maybe at step 14, when you're feeling really good, then maybe you'll print more of these than, that you can keep using. So how do you know when you have good checklists? The title of my talk doesn't mention peace of mind, but picking up where you left off with confidence is sometimes priceless. There are always interruptions, distractions, off days. I'm an experienced professional. I know what I do. I know what to do when I get a project. But I also have a lot of projects. So in my last full-time position, I had many different types of projects, different clients, different systems, different types of work. Having a checklist for many of the tasks helped me keep them all straight and know where I was at with any of them at any time. So have you ever had a project or a document drag on until you were sick of it? You just want it off your plate? How do you know if you've done enough? Sometimes a checklist can help you know you've done enough, then it's ready to get off your plate. This first one has happened to me more times than I care to mention. You get caught up in a messy document and there's so much to fix that you forget to check something important. Sometimes it's something small, sometimes it's really important, like misspelling the product name or having headings with typos, headings being bigger than other things and everybody sees them. But whatever it is, your editing checklist told you to look for it, so that was good. The second one has happened and other people have caught it for me because I was not using a checklist and I was just shooting from the hip. And as I'm growing my freelance business, the metrics have become really important. I have the metrics from when I edited a certain type of document for multiple clients where I used to work, and now I'm gathering these metrics for new clients who want to know, well, how much is this going to cost me? How much will it take? It's really helpful information. So just in the nick of time here. So let's go over some things to remember as you go out in the world to create your own comprehensive checklists. First of all, these checklists are for you to use. So I can't tell you what they should look like. And your boss shouldn't be creating them for you, though I've heard of people who do this. You need to create them for yourself. For teams, you can create one for the team if there's a task you all do and you need to be consistent in how you do it. But you have to work on the checklist together so they work for all of you. Checklists shouldn't be punitive or a necessary evil. It's a tool in your toolbox to do your job better with less strife and more peace of mind. Secondly, you should be updating your checklists and changing them as your job or the task changes. Unless, of course, your work never changes, but I don't know anybody who works somewhere like that. Generally, you can create them for editing tasks, which is what I've used them for extensively, You can also use them for different types of writing tasks, for social media work. I think they would also work for publications work, web work. I think there's a lot of different ways, and I'm sure you can help me brainstorm some other ways that people can use them. So here are the resources, and Liz is going to make the slides available on the website after the session. Obviously, the first resource I used a lot. The middle one is interesting. It goes more into the psychology of things, of why checklists are good. I didn't refer to it in this session, but I have referred to it in other sessions. And then, of course, I have an article on a similar topic specific to the editing. So here's my contact information. As I said, we will have slides. Please keep in touch. Shameless plug, I'll be speaking at Summit, the STC Summit, on expanding your toolbox to make you a more productive editor, which will incorporate parts of this talk and then a whole bunch of, word tips and other kind of technology to add tools to add to your toolbox. So please ask me questions, tell me about your experiences with checklists, swap checklists with me, ask for help. I love to talk about checklists.
That was great. Oh my
Thank
gosh, I
you.
had so much fun with that. Now it's time to type in those questions if you haven't already. And while you do, here's a look at what's coming up. The TC Dojo Mastermind Groups are monthly driven member discussion groups where attendees present their specific challenges to a group of their peers in a confidential, supportive environment. A mastermind is a collaborative environment where everyone lends their experience to each other. They can get feedback and advice about topics on their mind in real time from others who've been in their shoes. It's been amazing to participate in and a lot of fun too. We have 3 going on right now. One is everything TechCom, data, topic-based authoring, the specifics of cross-references or graphics. The other 2 are product-focused on Windchill for IT and ArborText users. These sessions are not free. They're a way to guarantee commitment between the participants. You can sign up at the TC Dojo website at mastermind.tcdojo.org. We know sometimes magic is just having the time to collaborate with someone who's been where you are. Next time in the TC Dojo, we've got Marcy Phelps. Over the last year, the voting has pushed career and soft skills to the top. So this year, we're stepping that up. Next month, Marcy will be here to talk about how you evolve your career, just like your client and employer needs evolve. Be sure and join us. Let's see if we've got some questions. Kelly, I see one that says, your great catches. You're documenting what you fixed that wasn't in the checklist, or that wasn't clear what the great catches were. Kelly, she's choking.
Okay, it could be either one. It could be great things that you caught because of the checklist, or it could be things that you caught that weren't on the checklist. I guess the point is just to give yourself a little boost, just to be excited about when you found something that was really important that you should have caught. So it's
Oh,
more about
excellent.
a motivational, go you.
Well, and when
Good
it
job.
comes time for reviews, it's probably a great place to
Yeah,
go pick that stuff up. Excellent.
yeah, and you could group that all together and put that on your review if you needed to. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, so the tracking items. What do you do with these after? You said you review them monthly. What kinds of things do you learn, track, or change, for example?
I had to put them into a spreadsheet of how many documents I did, how long they were, how long they took me. And it's helpful just to know how long things take and, who takes a little bit longer than others. And obviously longer documents take longer from an editing perspective. But that was, I had monthly reports that I put them into, but you could, depending on what you track, you could use it in other ways, I'm sure.
Cool, interesting. And it sounded like you said it's improved your ability to estimate.
Yeah, certainly. There's the documents that I spend a lot of my time editing now are called dossiers. They're formulary dossiers for pharmaceutical clients. And, they could be 100 pages, they could be 300 pages. And, so knowing how long does that take is really, it's been helpful in trying to estimate work going forward. For those especially, but I could also just look back, even with smaller documents and be like, okay, usually a 6-page SR takes me an hour, and that instead of just, because you do get interrupted a lot, and I tend to, especially with the long documents, I'll say when I start and stop multiple times, because, you got to go to a meeting when you're in the middle of something, or, somebody interrupts you, or some kind of interruption comes about. And so you start and stop, and you count up all of your time, because you could say, oh yeah, I worked on that for 3 days, but how many hours did you spend in 3 days getting that done? So I
Awesome.
find that's really helpful.
Well, because estimation is hard for all of
Yeah.
us.
Yeah,
So that
but that's one
I
way.
really like that. Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
I was doing it for publicity for TC Dojo. That's what I spent 2 days doing it last week, and I like that you said you had to sometimes edit, rework the checklist, or just
Yes.
start somewhere, because I know I never
Yes.
get things right the first time. So
No,
why try?
and the productivity comes in when you kind of think about it differently, and how can I be more productive, like instead of just doing it and getting it done, but to actually put the time in to think about it. I think that's where you really get
Awesome. I see a yay for
productivity.
visuals.
Thank you. It's good.
I like that too, actually, because it was not just the specificity mattered, right? I like that
Yes.
you had the don't. It's not a generic chess list, because I've got plenty of those, and those are terrible. But
Yeah,
yeah,
and I have seen, as I go to, I was doing research. I'm like, well, I have an editing textbook. That must have some checklists in it, right? Yeah, they were crap. It wasn't so great. So, yeah, that's why I try to tell people it's not. Don't Your boss can't create this for you. You have to do it yourself. So,
awesome, cool. Well, thank you so much for doing this. This was great.
thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
You're welcome. Always, it was hilarious. You guys couldn't hear me laughing as she was talking, but yeah, I definitely was. All right, we have a thank you, Kelly and Liz. Well, I'll take
Thank
that, even though it's all about you.
you. You're welcome.
Thanks for coming to the Single Sourcing Solutions TC Dojo, where it's all about you, what you want to learn. You should always attend a webinar live, because you can't ask questions of a video. Subscribe to our TC Dojo mailing list at join.tcdojo.org and never miss another. Every month, we go out and find experts willing to share their expertise based on your votes in the TC Dojo survey. Why should we tell you what to learn? You should tell us. So be sure to vote at survey.tcdojo.org. The TC Dojo is our pleasure to host. As always, if you need more personal help, we're here to take you from the basics to mastery. See you next time.